that Democrats must not let Jeffrey Epstein die. And so far, they've managed to do just that. This is the first scandal I can think of in really the decade plus of the Trump era where he cannot escape something. He's throwing everything in the kitchen sink out into the media, and nothing is distracting us. Perhaps like the Texas redistricting situation has drawn a few eyeballs in the past few days, excuse me. But for the most part, folks are laser focused on this story. It's been 4 weeks now. We are 4 weeks into this sordid, terrible, gross saga. And I think the reason why it's so important for Democrats to keep this going, to make sure the story has momentum, is that this episode, it manages to prove three things to not just the median American voter, but the MAGA base. And that is one, that Trump is a liar, objectively speaking. Two, Trump is a hypocrite, objectively speaking. And three, as you said a second ago, Ben, Trump protects elites. He is a sneering elitist who only cares about the rich and influential. And I think that truth is finally breaking through to even his most diehard supporters.
Yeah, and I think compared to a lot, like even the Texas redistricting, that maybe has taken up some space among us tuned in nerds who care about that stuff. But I do feel like this really broke through among the normies and people who hardly follow politics, just even through memes and things like that. Why do you think that Trump has struggled so hard to kind of get past this? Is he just kind of using his same strategies from the past and they're not working? Or, I mean, obviously the facts of the case are pretty damning and it's pretty hard for him to explain it away in a way that he would before, especially considering how much his people campaigned on this. But why do you think he's failed to kind of like change the story and get people talking about Obama being arrested in an AI video or whatever?
First and foremost, it's because the call is coming from inside the House. It's his own supporters. It's Charlie Kirk. It's Benny Johnson. It's all of these, Cartman-like dude bros behind podcast mics who have been interested in this story, have been obsessed with this story because Trump hand-fed it to them for a decade. And they don't understand why Trump won't just release the damn files. With all previous scandals, it's always been liberals, it's been the mainstream media, it's been Democrats who have been hounding him. This is the first time that I can think of that he has a real, genuine scandal with the base.
I'm just thinking about, the dynamics for 2026. And I think, Democrats have had some pretty strong polls recently in the generic congressional ballot, maybe a little more so than I would, be expecting coming in blind,
Yeah.
hearing about the world that we live in. And I'm kind of curious, how do you think that this will kind of trickle down to those elections in 2026, considering that, it's a really serious, obviously, story and scandal, but it is very, distant from the average congressional Republican, I would say.
Yeah. And one point I raise in the piece, David, and I think that's a great observation, is that Democrats cannot have Epstein be the only message. I raise how back in 2007, far sharper, far more spry Joe Biden was on a Democratic primary debate stage, and he pretty much ended Rudy Giuliani's career with one clever line, which was every sentence that comes out of Rudy Giuliani's mouth has a noun, a verb, and 9/11. And as I write in the piece, the line was lethal, one, because it was funny, but two, because it was true. Everyone recognized that for years, Giuliani had seized upon, had capitalized on, Ben, to use a word that you said earlier, this horrific, horrific trauma that had befallen the entire country, especially New York City. Um, and so that is the trap door that Democrats need to avoid. When a sentence comes out of their mouth, there needs to be a noun, there needs to be a verb, there needs to be Jeffrey Epstein. And then there needs to be a tie-in to kitchen table issues, to oligarchy, to the cost of living, to actually make the argument to use Epstein as a vehicle to catch folks' attention and to help them understand why the Epstein scandal is illustrative of all the other things that Trump has failed at and all the other ways in which he's making their lives worse.
That kind of leads me to A question. I don't know if you saw it, but there's a pretty prolific interview that Alyssa Slotkin had on Breaking Points, and so she was asked about Epstein, and she basically was like really said, "But I just think this whole thing is dumb because it's like distracting us from kitchen table issues." And I was just curious your thoughts on kind of how she framed the issue, which I thought was a little bit surprising because she has been, she has a lot of moderate tendencies in voting record, but for instance on redistricting, she's been very uh outspoken about being aggressive. So I'm kind of curious maybe why you think she responded the way she did and if you think that's incorrect, how it should be reframed.
I am curious, did that answer come before or after Crystal Ball fried
It
her
was the first
ass?
topic on the
The
interview,
first topic.
very
Okay.
first. Yeah.
So that's interesting. I wonder if it had come later, if she would have had a different answer, because I know that the big headline from that interview was her comments about Gaza. No, I'd say, in preparing for this conversation, I read that Axios piece that you guys sent me about how some Democrats really do not want to talk about Epstein. I think it was Tom Suozzi, the New York congressman, who said in particular he's done discussing this issue. And I fundamentally don't understand that position. I think in reading the piece, it was Pramila Jayapal, right? Yes, the former Progressive Caucus chair who said, I'm talking about Medicaid, I'm talking about tax breaks to billionaires, and I'm talking about Epstein because he fits right in there. Yes, yes, period. End of sentence. That is correct. That is the point. I think that there is a reluctance from some Democrats to engage in Epstein for two reasons. One, yes, to Swazi's point and to Slotkin's point, yeah, every sentence that you say about Epstein is a sentence you're not talking about affordability and the cost of living. Absolutely. However, excuse me. And then number two, I think there's a reluctance from Democrats because they feel like they don't want to feed the beast. They don't want to feed this dark, sordid, QAnon-esque conspiracy theory. And my answer to them on the first point is, to quote Pramila Jayapal, Epstein fits in with the cost of living and affordability and elites. And to my latter point, what I would say is there's no real conspiracy theory here, right? We know for a fact that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell trafficked hundreds of girls. Hundreds of girls were sexually abused, were traumatized, and he was effectively supplying them to a hell of a lot of powerful people in this country. I don't understand, yeah, the reticence to engage with it just because it's a disturbing, despicable tale. That's exactly why you should be talking about it. You should be demanding justice and accountability for these victims.
I almost feel like they have like trauma from the first Trump term and are thinking about this is another culture war issue. And I think they're missing the important point you made earlier that this is actually coming from the Republican side. This is coming from his base. This isn't some liberal issue. It's not like it's not a Russiagate. It's not Stormy Daniels. I feel like they almost lump it into that.
Yes.
But I actually thought Jeffries had like a good point on this where he was saying the reality is it's all connected. Donald Trump, his administration, and House Republicans have delivered nothing more than a government of the billionaires, by the billionaires, for the billionaires. So
Yes.
I think he's kind of echoing your point there. But I don't know. Do you think that this is going to be able to last until 2026 in a meaningful way? Like it almost a little bit feels to me like it's died down even a tiny bit in the last week or so. There's maybe just a limit in our current media ecosystem for how long a story can stay in the news. I mean, obviously none of his like, oh, are we still talking about Epstein stuff is working, but do you feel like it can continue to drag out? I mean, I guess when Congress gets back into session, there will
I was gonna
probably
say
be a
that.
vote. Yeah. So if you could talk about like how you see kind of the next year or so going with this story.
I don't know if it can go all the way till next November. That would be an interesting thing to watch. I do think that this has legs for at least the next few months. One, yes, to your point, Ben, Congress is going to come back in September. And I think that Mike Johnson and Oversight Chair Comer have like prematurely shot themselves in the foot by subpoenaing all these officials, but no one really relevant to the actual story. Why is Alex Acosta, Trump's former labor secretary, if I'm not mistaken, who gave Epstein this unbelievably ridiculous sweetheart deal, why is he not being subpoenaed? Why is Ghislaine Maxwell apparently now she's escaped this testimony that she was originally set to deliver. And then, like, I think Comer and Johnson and a host of these Republicans who are squirming, who know that they're in a bad place, they think that September will turn the tide in the story because, oh, we subpoenaed Bill Clinton and Clinton's going to come talk about us and the Democrats are going to be embarrassed. We don't give a flying fuck about Bill Clinton. If Bill Clinton was in the Epstein files, if he diddled some kids, then throw him behind bars. I don't think there's any love lost in the Democratic Party right now for Bill Clinton.
Yeah, and I almost wonder if that provides a bit of an opportunity for Democrats. I'm thinking about Ezra Klein's appearance on the Flagrant Andrew Schultz podcast, and he was talking. They watched the clip of John Ossoff talking about corruption, and he was pointing out how important it was for Ossoff to use the both sides framing in terms of kind of creating this image of like a new Democratic Party in a sense, kind of shaking the like conceptions people have of it. So I wonder if almost Clinton can be kind of a sacrificial lamb for them to some new generation of Democrats to be like, sure, like wherever the corruption is, wherever the scandal is, please go after it. And we're the real anti-institution, like outsiders fighting to get what you guys have been asking for.
Yeah, if I can pick on that for just a second, Ben, I wrote another piece in December of last year, another column for The Guardian, titled "Luigi Mangione is the Median American Voter." Spicy title, but I think the argument of the piece is actually not nearly as crazy as the title makes it seem. In the aftermath of the CEO's murder, and then subsequently in the aftermath of Mangione's arrest, I went through his social media profile and I was watching all of these talking heads express befuddlement as to what his politics were. They were like, what do you mean he follows both AOC and Joe Rogan? Why is he following RFK Jr. and Ezra Klein? And what I argue in that piece, and I really firmly believe that, or rather believe this, is that the dominant divide in American politics is not conservative versus liberal, or Republican versus Democrat, or even fascist versus anti-fascist, as strange as that might sound. It's pro-system versus anti-system. And if you look at all of the folks that Mangione was engaging with, all of them are anti-system figures. Some of them are very obviously anti-system, and like an RFK Jr. or a Joe Rogan, or an AOC, right? And then some of them, my editor was like, what do you mean? How is Ezra Klein an anti-system figure? And I said, well, who was the first personality, the first voice in mainstream, quote unquote, mainstream legacy media to say the emperor has no clothes, that Joe Biden is clearly cognitively declining and needs to drop out? It was Ezra Klein in February of 2024. That gives you anti-system street cred from my point of view. And so I raise all of this to say that I think the power of the Epstein saga for Democrats is not just because they should do it because it's the right thing to do, because we should be seeking justice and accountability for these women, but it also achieves something that they've never been able to do before, and that is paint Donald Trump as a pro-system figure, as a pro-system political avatar. One other thing I raised in the piece is a theory first put forth by New York Times reporter Maggie Haberman, and that is that sort of Trump's secret sauce, or rather, to understand Trump's secret sauce, you need to understand how New York high society works. And in New York high society, there are effectively two different types of elites in concentric circles. There is a core ring of folks with status and influence and sort of a certain shine around them. And then there's a broader circle of folks who are rich or are titans of industry, what have you. And Trump has been the political dynamo that he's been for the last decade or more because he's managed to straddle that line, right? Where he's always presented himself as elite in the sense that he was a rich man who was good at business, but he never had status. He never had that shine, and he could credibly attack the system because of that. What the Epstein scandal shows is, no, he's in that core ring. He is an elitist piece of shit. And that is the power. That is the value.